Aya, nila kinuzawia, miamia, mayawate pake neola kakoke, nungi kakikwe. I'm Wesley Leonard. I'm a citizen of the Miami tribe of Oklahoma, but I live here in California. And I'm a linguist, or a linguistic anthropologist, and I work on the reclamation, as I call it, of indigenous languages. And what I've come to see over a period of years is that there's really a lot going on. I also see that there are lots and lots of misconceptions about indigenous languages. So I wanted to mention a few of those. One, and a major one, is that indigenous languages are from the past and stayed there in the past. This is a real problem because, of course, here I am today, an indigenous person, and there are many, many others like me. We are people with a past, not people from the past, and likewise with our languages. They have contemporary relevance. So one of the major misconceptions is that indigenous languages belong in the past. No, they come from the past, they exist in the present, and they will continue to exist in the future. Another major misconception is, of course, that these indigenous languages are all the same, or at least more similar than they actually are. And for whatever reason, we native people tend to be lumped together. And it's true that in certain political senses that makes sense because we've all had certain common experiences in terms of the colonizers treating us all the same, sending us to boarding schools and things like that. And so a certain political sense has developed out of that. And yet we are all different. We speak different languages. But what I think is held in common among those languages, beyond the fact that they exist in the present and will exist in the future, is that they're very, very important to the people who claim them. Given that language learning is relatively difficult to do and it takes some resources and it takes time, what does it tell you that so many people are putting so much effort into doing it? This idea that we could somehow just put our languages aside, or that we wouldn't care about them, or that we would forget about them, really, I think, is misguided and doesn't recognize how important our nations, our indigenous nations and our cultures are to us. We can't put aside our languages any more than we could put aside anything else that's integral to our identity or to our culture. A lot of times there are misconceptions about the languages themselves. For whatever reason, people find it straightforward that languages such as English would continue to evolve with the times. But in terms of expressive potential, one of the things that means is that a language can add, or does add, to its vocabulary to reflect the needs of its users. So for example, in my language in Miami, our word for computer, which didn't exist historically, is kindelindakane, which means something like the thing that thinks fast, or an instrument for thinking fast. Achimwakane is telephone, and that means a thing for relating information, or in a conversational sense. And this is a basic process, but again, for whatever reason, people have this idea that indigenous languages in form were frozen in the past. And it goes right back to that idea that indigenous peoples are frozen in the past. Another myth that comes up is that people cannot learn indigenous languages. And although these indigenous languages of California, and for that matter Miami or any other indigenous language, they're all different from each other, they have one thing that tends to be true about all of them, not all of them, but tends to be true, is that their grammar is somewhat more complex than that of English, especially the morphology. That's how words are put together. So in English we have words like laughed, where the first part is the verb itself and the last part, the suffix, it shows that it was in the past tense or something to that effect. And so there are two parts to that word. Well, there are various indigenous languages of California, or for that matter Miami, which allow lots and lots of things to be put together in a word. So who's doing what to whom, how it's being done, when it's being done, all of those details might be encoded in affixes, as we say in English, prefixes and suffixes that go on to a root that shows the basic action or state itself. And so people will look at those things and say, well, how can anybody learn those? Indigenous language learning is too hard. People never really become speakers of their languages, and this is absolutely untrue. But again, there's that implicit idea, and it sort of drives a lot of the discourse here in United States society, which is that, especially for indigenous languages, they belong in the past. They're legitimate only if they're used in a form that's associated with the past, and that people can't really learn them today. All of those things are completely untrue.